The torches in the western corridor of Hadeth 4 had not been lit in 12 years. Marith knew this because she had been the one ordered to keep them dark. The old servant's whisper still echoed from her first week in the mountain hold. The western corridor leads to the Alpha's private war chamber, child, and the Alpha's private war chamber leads nowhere good for girls like us. For 3 winters she had walked the eastern routes, and kept her gray eyes lowered when the great doors at the end of that forbidden hallway swung open and Valoran Drask emerged. Tonight she walked the western corridor anyway. She walked it because she had heard her own name spoken on the other side of those doors an hour ago, and the voice that had spoken it was not gentle. She walked it because the child inside her had begun to stir restlessly the moment she heard that voice. She walked it because for 6 months she had loved a man who had whispered to her in moonlight that she was the only soul in the world he could not bear to lose, and tonight she needed to know if any of it had been real. The candle in her hand guttered as she pressed deeper into the shadows. Her bare feet made no sound against the cold stone. Her grandmother had taught her, long before the fevers took her, how to walk like the deer walked, from the heels, slow, breath held between steps. We are small things in a world of teeth, my Marith. Smallness is a gift. Use it. She pressed her back against the carved column nearest the war chamber and listened. A woman's laugh first. Low, amused, the laugh of someone who had never been afraid in her life. Marith did not recognize the voice, but she recognized the privilege inside it, a daughter of one of the high mountain lines. Then a man's voice, familiar in a way that hollowed out her chest. You worry over nothing, Sarith. The girl is a passing matter. Marith's lungs forgot how to draw air. She knew that voice. She had felt it against the curve of her throat in the dark. The voice of Valoran Drask, Alpha of Hadeth 4, the man who had pressed his teeth to her shoulder under a hunter's moon and sworn, You are mine, Marith, and I am yours, and nothing in this hollow world will ever change that. The woman called Sarith spoke again. She has been seen weeping in the lower halls, Valoran. Servants talk. The cook says she has been ill for weeks. If she is what I think she is nothing of the sort. You are certain? A pause. Then a sound that broke something inside Marith's chest before her mind had finished understanding it. He laughed. It was not the laugh she knew. The laugh she knew was rare, was small, was a private thing he gave her in the dark like a coin pressed into her palm. This laugh was loud, performative, the laugh of a man at a feast surrounded by men he wanted to impress. Sarith, please. I have watched the girl flinch at her own shadow for 3 winters. She trembles when I look at her. Do you imagine I keep her for her wit? Then why keep her at all? Because a soft thing in soft hands is a comfort, and a comfort costs less than a wife. She brings me tea. She warms a cold bed. She believes whatever I tell her because she has nothing else to believe in. And when she cries, and she does cry, Sarith, you would not believe how easily she cries. She does so quietly, into her own pillow, where no one has to hear it. A girl who suffers in silence is the most useful thing a tired man can own. The candle in Marith's hand went out. She did not remember dropping it. She did not remember the small wet sound that escaped her throat. She did not remember the way her free hand flew to her belly, instinctive, protective, covering the small swell beneath her dress that no one in this hold yet knew about. No one except her, and the herb woman in the lower village who had confirmed it 3 days ago. Sarith was laughing now, a bright, delighted sound. Oh, Valoran, you are crueler than they say. I am tired is what I am. The council will have its answer by spring. The girl will be sent to one of the outer holds with a small purse and a story to tell. She will be grateful. They always are. And if she has, as the cook suspects, then the herb woman will be sent with the appropriate teas, and the matter will resolve itself. Pour the wine, Sarith. I am sick of this conversation. The clink of a goblet. The blood had begun to roar in Marith's ears so loudly that the world had become a long underwater sound. She moved. Her body simply understood. The way a deer's body understood when the wolf was close, that it must move now and think later. She walked. She did not run because running made noise, and noise was the enemy of small things in a world of teeth. She walked back along the western corridor with her empty candle still gripped in her fist, and her free hand pressed flat against her belly, and she did not let herself cry until she had reached the servant's stair and descended 3 flights into the dark. Then she sank to her knees and put both hands over her mouth and wept without sound. Because a girl who suffers in silence is the most useful thing a tired man can own, and she would never again, give Veiler the satisfaction of hearing her cry. The mark on her shoulder, the secret bite he had given her under the hunter's moon, began to burn. She pressed her hand to it through the linen of her dress and felt the heat radiating from her own skin, and for the first time in 6 months, she understood that the mark had never been a promise. It had been a leash. She drew her hand away. She stood. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. And in the darkness of the servant's stair, with a child she had not yet told a single soul about growing inside her, Marith made the only decision left to her. She would be gone before dawn. She would take nothing he had given her. Not the silver comb, not the cloak lined with fox fur, not the small ivory ring he had pressed into her palm the night he marked her. She would leave it all on the stone of his war chamber floor, where he would find it and understand that the soft thing in soft hands had heard every word. She slid her hand down to her belly again, and she did not weep this time, because the thing growing inside her was not soft and was not silent, and would never be, the most useful thing a tired man could own. "Come, little one," she whispered into the dark. "We are going home." She did not yet know where home was. She had 4 hours to find out. The first time Valerine Drask had spoken to her, she had been on her knees in the herb garden, cutting winter sage for the kitchens, and she had not known he was there until his shadow fell across the bed of frost-bitten leaves. She had looked up expecting a guard. She had found the Alpha of Hadith Vor crouching down to her eye level in the snow, his amber eyes fixed on her face as if he were trying to remember whether he had seen her in a dream. "You are the new healer's girl." She had nodded. "You have gray eyes." She had nodded again. "I have been told that gray eyes among our people are the mark of a long-blooded line, the old kind, the kind we do not see often anymore." He had reached out, slowly, the way a man reaches toward a deer he does not wish to startle, and brushed a single fingertip against the corner of her jaw. Then he had stood, nodded once, and walked away through the snow. She had not slept that night. She had not understood why. She understood now. It had been a hunter's first look at the trail. Marith pressed her face against the cold stone of the servant's stair. 6 months of memories. 6 months of moonlit walks along the high ridge. 6 months of believing that the most powerful man in the mountain hold had looked at a no-name healer's apprentice with gray eyes and seen something worth keeping. A soft thing in soft hands is a comfort. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. The night he had marked her, the night under the hunter's moon, on the cliff above the frozen river, he had said the words she would remember for the rest of her life. "You are mine, Marith. I am yours." He had pressed his forehead to hers and whispered that one day, when the council was satisfied, he would announce her to the world. He had used the word queen. He had pressed his ivory ring into her palm and folded her fingers closed around it. She had not yet told him about the child. She had been waiting for the right night. She had been writing the words in her head for 3 weeks. "Valoran. There is a child." She would never say them now. She climbed the servant's stair on shaking legs. The hold was quiet at this hour. The deep middle hour, the hour the night watch called the wolf's breath. She passed no one. Her small chamber was at the end of the lowest servant's hall. A pallet. A wooden chest. A single window the size of a hand. She lit no candle. She knelt beside the chest and opened it. The fox fur cloak. She left it folded. The silver comb. She left it on the pallet. The ivory ring, kept wrapped in linen at the bottom of the chest. She unwrapped it. The small carved wolf's head on its surface gleamed as it had gleamed the night he gave it to her. She set it down on the pallet beside the comb. Then she pulled out the things that were truly hers. A wool dress, plain, mended at the elbows. A second shift. Her grandmother's iron-handled knife. A small leather pouch of silver, 3 months of saved wages, kept hidden in the wall behind the chest, because something in her had always known. A water skin. A flint. She dressed. She wrapped a thick wool shawl around her shoulders. She tied her boots. She slung the small bag across her body. She placed her hand, one last time, on the small swell of her belly. "We do not look back," she whispered. "Do you hear me, little wolf? We do not look back. Not once. Not ever." The child stirred under her palm. She crossed to the door. She paused. She thought of the rasp of his voice in the dark. She thought of the way he had laughed an hour ago and called her a comfort, and a thing, and a useful silence. She stepped out into the corridor and pulled the door closed behind her. She did not look back. Far above her, in the war chamber where 2 voices murmured over a bottle of southern wine, a man with amber eyes was raising his goblet to his lips. He did not yet feel it. He would. Within the hour, the bond on his chest would begin to ache in a way he had no name for. But that was an hour from now. Tonight, in the lowest corridor of Hadeth Vor, a girl with gray eyes and a child no one knew about slipped out through the kitchen gate, while the night watch dozed against the gatepost, and the wind off the eastern slope caught her wool shawl, and the snow took her footprints within minutes of her passing. By the time the dawn bell rang in the bell tower, Marith would be 6 miles down the mountain road, and there would be no one in Hadeth Vor or in any of the lower villages who knew which way she had gone. The kitchen gate had not been guarded since the old Alpha's reign. Marith knew this because she had been the one to unbar it for the milk sled 4 mornings out of 7. She knew the watch rotation by heart, because in the lowest tier of the hold, knowing such things was the difference between a quiet life and a bad one. She slipped through the gate at the change of watch, and was through the outer courtyard before the new man had finished settling onto his stool. The cold hit her like an open palm. She did not run. Running was the enemy of small things. She walked at the pace of a servant with somewhere ordinary to be. The path forked at the old shrine of the River Mother, 200 paces beyond the gate. The northern fork wound up to the high pastures. The eastern fork led down through the goat tracks, down to the trade road that ran to the long flat country. She took the eastern fork. 100 paces past the shrine, she stepped off the path entirely. The path would be the first thing they searched. The path was where the dogs would go, where any man on a horse would go. She was a small gray thing in a wool shawl with a grandmother's knife and a child the size of a winter pear, and she would not survive a chase. She walked into the trees. She moved between the close-set pines at an angle to the path, south and east, keeping the great dark shape of Hadeth Vor at her back and the faint pre-dawn lightning of the sky to her left. Her grandmother had taught her this too. The mountain runs north to south, my Marith. If the dawn is on your left hand, you walk away from the cold places. A branch cracked behind her. She froze. For a long moment she did not breathe. The forest was perfectly still. She listened until her ears began to ring with the listening. Another crack. Closer. She crouched behind the trunk of a pine wide enough to hide 3 of her. She drew her grandmother's knife. She held it flat against her thigh. Never raise a blade until you are using it, child. A raised blade is a question, and questions get answered. A shape moved through the trees 20 paces from her. A guard. She recognized the broad line of his shoulders before she recognized the face. Corvin, the second of the gate watch. The one who had been dozing on his stool when she slipped past. He was not running. He was walking the way a man walks when he has heard something but does not yet know if it is worth waking the hold for. She pressed her cheek against the bark. She did not move. She did not breathe. She closed her eyes because some part of her, old and animal, believed that if she could not see him, then he could not see her. Corvin stopped 15 paces from her. She could hear him breathing. She could hear the leather of his belt creak as he turned. She could hear the sound of his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. She thought about the child. She thought about the way Corvan had looked at her once across the kitchen yard when she was scrubbing pots in the rain. A long look, the kind of look a man gave a woman when he was deciding something about her. Even if he found her, he might not raise the alarm at all. He might simply take her by the wrist and lead her back, alone, by a longer route, and the things that happened on that longer route would be his to choose, and hers to survive. The knife in her hand stopped feeling cold. He took one step toward her tree. Then a fox screamed somewhere down the slope. That high, terrible, woman-in-pain sound a vixen makes in the deep cold. And Corvin's head snapped toward the sound, and his shoulders eased, and he muttered something under his breath, and he turned, and he walked back the way he had come. Marith did not move for a long time after he was gone. Only when the forest had been silent around her for what felt like an hour did she put the knife back into her belt, with hands that had begun, finally, to shake. She did not weep. She had wept enough for one night. She stood. She turned south and east, and she began to walk. Far above her, in the high tower of Hadeth Vor, Valoran Drask set down his goblet of southern wine. The woman called Sarith was speaking. He did not hear her. Something had begun as a faint warmth across the bond mark on his chest, and was now, as he sat very still with his hand pressed flat against his sternum, becoming a slow, deepening cold. Valoran? Be quiet, Sarith. She fell silent. He had not used that voice with her before. He stood. He crossed to the long window that looked east. He pressed his palm flat against the cold glass. The bond mark on his chest pulsed once, hard, and then began, slowly, terribly, to bleed. He did not yet understand. By the time the dawn came, the bond mark on Valerine Drask's chest would have bled through 3 layers of linen, and he would be on his knees on the floor of his war chamber, and he would, finally, have begun to understand. But by then, Marith would be gone. The village was called Brenmore, and it sat in the long, flat country where the snow did not last. Marith had walked into it on a gray afternoon 4 months after the night she left Hadeth 4, with her boots worn through at the heels and a swelling under her wool dress that she could no longer hide. My name is Issa. My husband died of the lung fever in the high passes. I am looking for honest work. I know herbs. The village had taken the story without question. The miller's wife was dying of an illness no one could name. 3 children had broken out in fever spots. The old healer had drowned in the river and no one had replaced her. When Marith laid her grandmother's iron-handled knife on the headman's table and asked, quietly, if there was a place she might be useful, the headman had looked at her for a long moment and then said, "Child, the god sent you." They had given her the dead healer's cottage. 2 rooms, a stone hearth, a garden gone to weed. That had been 4 months ago. It was high summer now. The garden was full of tansy and feverfew and yarrow. The miller's wife had not died. The fever spots had passed. The village had begun, slowly, to call her healer Issa instead of the new woman. She had made friends only with the old midwife, a woman named Braille, whose hands shook from age but whose eyes did not miss anything. Braille had taken one long look at the swell of Marith's belly the first time they met, and had said, "Only, twins, child. You're carrying twins. Has anyone told you?" No one had. Meredith had sat down very slowly on the wooden stool in Braille's kitchen and put her face in her hands. Braille had not asked any questions. Braille had only put a cup of strong nettle tea into her hands and waited. After a long while, Meredith had said, "I cannot do this." And Braille had said, "Yes, you can, child. You already are." The babies had grown. They moved in opposite directions, kicked from opposite sides of her at the same moment, hiccuped in alternating rhythms that Braille said meant they were already arguing about who would come out first. She was becoming, almost, content. And then, the nightmares began. By the third month, they had grown teeth. She would dream she was running through pines in the dark, and someone was screaming her name behind her in a voice raw with grief, and she would turn, every time, against every instinct, and find Valerin on his knees in the snow, with both hands pressed to his chest and blood running between his fingers. His amber eyes would not be cruel. They would be wet, searching. He would open his mouth. He would say, "Meredith, please." And she would wake. She would wake with her hand pressed to the bond mark on her shoulder, and the linen of her shift soaked through, and when she pulled the linen back from her skin in the candlelight, she would find, every time, a slow weeping of blood from a scar that should have closed months ago. Braille had seen it once. The old midwife had set her cup of tea down very carefully and looked at the mark for a long time, and then looked at Meredith's face. And finally she had said, "Child, who gave you that bite?" A man who said it meant something. And did it? Meredith had not answered. Braille had not asked again. But she had left a small clay pot of yarrow paste on Meredith's doorstep the next morning, with a note that said only for the bleeding. Both kinds. The summer wore on. Meredith taught herself not to dream. She drank the bitter tea Braille blended for her each evening and slept the hard, heavy sleep of women who have decided to outwit their own minds. She no longer let herself wonder if he was looking for her. She had her cottage. She had her garden. She had 2 small lives kicking under her hand. She had Braille. She had enough. And then, on a hot afternoon at the end of the 7th month of her exile, a stranger walked into Brenmore asking questions about a young woman with gray eyes. The blacksmith's son saw him first. He came running on bare brown feet and stood in her doorway and said, "Healer Yissa, my mother says to tell you there's a man at the well, and he is asking after a healer with gray eyes who walked down out of the high country last winter, and my mother says you should not come to the well today." Meredith set down the pestle she was holding. She did not let her hand shake. She had practiced. "Thank you, Tovin. Tell your mother I am grateful." The boy ran. She crossed to the pallet in the back room. She lifted the loose stone in the floor beneath it. She drew out the small leather pouch she had buried there in her first week. Silver coins, her grandmother's knife, a folded square of waxed cloth, in case she ever needed to leave again on no notice at all. She set the pouch on the pallet. She placed both hands on her belly. "Not yet, little ones. We do not run yet. We listen first." That night she lay awake long past the hour the village had gone to sleep. The mark beneath her shift had begun, faintly, to warm. Not to bleed, but to warm, in the way it had warmed the night she walked down out of the mountain. Outside her window, a wind began to rise. Somewhere in it, very far away, she thought she heard a wolf. The man at the well was gone by morning. Braille came to Meredith's cottage at first light with a basket of brown eggs and a face that looked older than it had the day before. She sat down at Meredith's kitchen table without invitation and said, "He left at dusk. Rode south. He paid the innkeeper in old silver, northern silver, the kind they cut at the high mints. He didn't give a name. He asked 3 questions. He listened to the answers. He left." Meredith poured her a cup of tea. What were the questions? Whether a young woman had come down the road in late winter, whether she had gray eyes, whether she had been alone, and the answers. "Folk here don't talk much to strangers, child." The innkeeper said no. The miller's wife said no. The smith said no. The smith's boy said no, because his mother had got to him first. Braille, I am not finished. Marith closed her mouth. The smith's wife found me at the well after the man had gone. She'd been watching from her kitchen window. She said the man wept. The cup in Marith's hand stopped moving. He wept? Quietly. Not so anyone would have seen unless they were looking for it. He stood at the well and asked his 3 questions, and when each answer came back no, the corner of his mouth moved. Just a little, in a way she said looked almost like relief, as if he'd been afraid of what the answer would be. And then he walked back to his horse, and he stood with his face pressed against the horse's neck for a long moment, and he wept. And then he wiped his face on his sleeve, and he mounted and he rode south. Marith did not speak. Braille reached across the table and took her hand. Child, I have buried 2 husbands, and I have delivered 87 babies, and I have lived in this village for 61 years. I know a man who is searching for a woman he wronged when I see one, and I know a man who is searching for a woman he loves, and the difference is not always what you think. Marith's eyes burned. She did not let them spill. He is not searching for me, Braille. No? He has guards. He has hounds. If he wanted to find me, he would have found me in a week. A man riding alone, asking 3 questions at a well. That is not how Valerin Drask hunts. The name came out before she could catch it. Braille did not blink. After a long moment she said, only, Drask, that is a northern name. That is the name on the high mints. Marith pressed her free hand to her face. You should have said it the day you walked into my kitchen, Braille said mildly. You'd have slept better since. Drink your tea. Marith drank. Her hand was no longer steady. The man at the well was riding alone, child, and he was riding south, and he was weeping. I do not know who he is, but I know what I have heard from the carters who come up from the south road. There are stories now. What stories? That the high mountain hold has gone quiet, that the Alpha of Hadeth Vor has not been seen at council in 6 months, that the trade caravans have stopped coming down through the eastern passes because the wolves have grown bold and feral, that a sickness has come on the high country, not in the people, but in the land. The wheat is small, and the cattle do not breed. Marith's mouth had gone dry. And one story more. Braille's eyes were very steady. That the Alpha himself rides out at night, alone, with no guard. That he rides for days at a time. The men who follow him at a distance to keep him alive say he speaks to the wind. He says one word over and over. The same word. They cannot make it out. They only know it is a name. The teacup in Marith's hand cracked. She set it down very carefully. Braille, she said, her voice a thread. If he finds me, the people who poisoned him against me will find me too. The babies are not safe. Stop. Listen to what you just said. You said the people who poisoned him against me. I did not mean. You did mean. You have been turning it over for months in the back of your mind where you would not let yourself look. You heard him say a thing in a room he did not know you were standing outside of. You heard him laugh in a way you had never heard him laugh before. And some part of you, the part that lay with him under the hunter's moon and felt what was real, has been whispering since the first night you slept under my roof, that the man you heard in that war chamber was not the man you knew. Braille, he laughed. Men perform, child. Men perform for other men. Men perform for the rivals they want to wound, and the spies they suspect are listening at the door. You were not in that room. You did not see his face. You heard a voice through stone, and you ran, and you were right to run, because a woman alone in a hold with a child in her belly has no margin for error. But running was the answer to the danger of the moment. It was not the answer to the question of who he is. Marith was crying now. The tears were falling without sound onto the wood between them. Bonds that are real do not unmake themselves, child. Whatever you heard in that room, there is more to the story than you know. Marith pulled her hand back. She wiped her face with the heel of her palm. I do not want there to be more to the story. I know. I want the story to be the story I ran from. I know, child. If the story is something else, then I have been carrying his children alone in this cottage for 7 months while he— She could not finish. Braille did not make her. The old midwife only leaned across the table and pressed her dry old forehead to Meredith's for a long moment, and then she rose, and she took her basket of eggs, and she went to the door. She paused on the threshold. The man at the well will come back, child. Or another like him. I do not think you have many days. Decide what you want to do before the choice is taken from you. She left. Meredith rose eventually and crossed to the window. Beyond her garden, the village pasture sloped down to the line of black alders that marked the edge of the woods. A wolf was standing at the edge of the woods. It was watching her cottage. The size of a large hound, with a coat the color of old iron, and eyes that even at this distance she could see, were a clear, steady amber. It did not move. It only stood, with its head turned toward her window. It was not him. The shape was wrong. The size was wrong. This was a smaller animal. A tracker. The wolf's nostrils flared. It tilted its head. And then, with a slow deliberation that froze Meredith's breath in her lungs, it turned and walked back into the trees. The mark on her shoulder began to burn. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the wooden chair by her hearth with her grandmother's knife unsheathed across her knees, and she watched the door, and she listened. The wedge of pine was set hard. The shutters were drawn. The mark on her shoulder burned for hours. This was a steady, deepening pull, as if a string had been tied behind her collarbone and a hand on the other end was drawing it slowly toward the door. The babies kicked. Both of them. Harder than they had ever kicked, in a single shared rhythm, thud, thud, thud against the inside of her belly, like two small hands knocking on the same door from the inside. She pressed her palm flat against the swell. I know. I feel it too. Just before dawn, there was a sound at her door. Not a knock. Knocking would have been honest. This was a softer sound. The sound of a hand laid flat against the wood. The way a person lays a hand against a door when they do not yet trust themselves to knock. Meredith rose. The knife was in her hand. A voice spoke through the wood. A man's voice. Tired in a way she recognized. Healer Issa. She did not answer. Healer Issa, my name is Thomas Erwin. I have ridden from the north for 11 days. I will not enter your house. I will not raise my voice. But I am asking you, please. Open the door wide enough to look at my face. That is all I ask. Look at my face. And if you do not know me, I will go. Meredith pressed her forehead against the inside of the door. She knew the name. Thomas Erwin had been the master of horse at Hadeth 4 for 30 years. He had pulled her up onto a saddle behind him once, when she was 16, and had twisted her ankle on the icy slope to the upper pastures, and he had ridden her back to the hold without a word, and without taking any of the small liberties another man might have taken. He had been the only man in Hadeth 4 besides Valerin who had ever called her child in a way that did not feel like an insult. She unbarred the door. She opened it the width of her hand. The face on the other side was Tomas's, older than she remembered. Hollower. His gray hair had gone fully white. His eyes, when they met hers, filled with tears so quickly that she did not have time to step back. Oh, child, it is you. Thank the bones. It is you. She did not let him in. She stood in the gap with her grandmother's knife in her hand and her free hand pressed to her belly, and she said, in a voice she had not heard from herself in 7 months, "Tell me why you have come, Thomas Erwin. Tell me quickly, and do not lie to me, because I will know." Thomas swallowed. He is dying, child. The knife in her hand did not lower. Inside her chest, something that had been wound tight for 7 months made a small wrong noise. Valerin. He has not eaten in 4 days. He has not slept in 9. The bond mark on his chest opened the night you left, and it has not closed. Not for a single hour. The healers cannot stop it. Tomas's voice cracked. He does not know I am here. He believes you left him because you wanted to leave, and he has forbidden any of us to look for you, because his pride will not allow him to chase a woman who fled him. His pride. Tomas flinched. I know how that sounds, but you do not understand. He has not been himself since the night you left. He sits in the war chamber and stares at the eastern slope, and he speaks your true name over and over under his breath until the men around him weep. The hold is dying with him. The land is dying with him. And there is a thing. His voice broke. There is a thing he does not know, child, that I have come to tell you, because if you knew it, you would understand what was done to you, and to him, and to... He looked at the swell of her belly. His face went the color of old ash. Oh, sweet bones. Tell me what was done. Tomas opened his mouth. He did not get the chance. His head came up sharply, his nostrils flared. The exhaustion in his face fell away in a single instant and was replaced by the face of a man who has just realized he is being hunted. Child, they have followed me. Who? Get back. Bar the door. Now. A scream rose from the far end of the village, the hard, cut-off scream of a grown man who had been struck across the throat and would not scream again. Tomas spun. His hand went to the long knife at his belt. The horse behind him whinnied in pure animal terror, because horses know wolves, and what was coming up the village lane in the gray pre-dawn light was not a man, it was 3 men. And they were not, any of them, fully men. They were halfway through a shift, fur breaking through the skin of their forearms, jaws beginning to lengthen, eyes already gone gold, coming up the lane at the loping ground-eating speed of creatures who had been running half the night and were not yet tired. The first carried a blade in each hand, the second carried a bow. The third carried nothing, because his teeth were enough. Inside! Tomas roared. Marith, inside now! Marith stepped back. She did not bar the door. Tomas was outside it, and Thomas had ridden 11 days to find her, and 3 half-shifted hunters were 30 paces from him and closing. She did the only thing she could think of. She set her grandmother's knife on the table. She crossed to the small clay jar on the mantel where she kept the dried mountain rue. She tore a single dark green leaf in half between her fingers, and she pressed 1/2 against the bond mark on her shoulder, and she closed her eyes, and she did the thing her grandmother had taught her to do only once, on the night before her grandmother died, with the warning that she must never do it unless she was already prepared to die for the doing. She pulled on the bond. She did not know how she knew how. She only knew that the string that had been tied behind her collarbone for 7 months had a hand on the other end, and she knew whose hand it was, and she knew, with a certainty that was older than her body, that if she pulled hard enough on the string, he would feel it. She pulled. The mark on her shoulder split open. Hot blood ran down beneath her shift. She gasped and staggered against the table and pressed her hand over her mouth so the babies would not hear her cry out. And very far to the north, in a war chamber overlooking an eastern slope, an alpha who had not slept in 9 days went rigid in his chair, and his eyes flared back to a clear and terrible amber, and he rose, and he howled, and the sound that came out of him was not a sound any wolf in Hadeth Vor had ever heard before. The mountain heard it. The wolves on the high slope, gone feral and lost, lifted their heads as one and answered. But none of that helped Marith. The hunter with the blade was at her door. The door opened. The hunter came through the door shoulder first. He was not a tall man, but he was wide in the chest and his arms had begun the change. Black fur was breaking through the skin of his forearms in coarse, uneven patches. His jaw had pushed forward by a finger's width. He came through the doorway with a curved blade in his right hand and a half claw outstretched, and he moved with the loose, wrong-jointed speed of a creature that was no longer entirely one thing or the other. Marith was behind the table. Her grandmother's knife was on it. She did not pick it up. Her hand had not obeyed her. The mark on her shoulder was bleeding in a slow flood beneath her shift, and the children inside her were knocking thud, thud, thud against the inside of her belly, and something was happening to her hands that she did not understand. Her hands were warm, not hot, warm in the way a stone in a riverbed is warm after a long day of sun, warm from somewhere deeper than the surface. The hunter saw her looking. He smiled. It was a wrong smile, on a face that was no longer entirely a face. Little gray eyes. The voice was almost gone. Little long-blooded thing. You are smaller than they said. Get out of my house. I am to bring back the marks. He took a step around the table. The mark on your shoulder. The mark on your belly. 2 of them now, I am told. The Lord Sister wants proof. The Lord Sister. The phrase rearranged something in Marith's chest. Sarith had not been a noble's name only. It had been a title. The high title of one of the old council houses, and Marith had been too small and too young and too in love to know it. The hunter took another step. She raised her hands. She did not know why. She had no weapon in them. She raised them anyway, palms out, the way her grandmother had once raised her hands to stop a cart horse that had bolted in the village square. A small woman standing in the path of a thing 6 times her weight and saying, "No further, brother. No further." The warmth in her hands flared. It was not light. There was no glow. It was only that the air between her palms and the hunter's chest thickened, in the way air thickens before a storm, and the hunter, 3 steps from her, blade raised, half a wolf already, went still. He went still in the wrong way. The way a man stills when the part of him that does the choosing has been, for a single moment, taken away from him. His eyes lost focus. His blade arm lowered. Her grandmother's voice came back to her. We are an old line, my Myrith. Older than the Holds. The wolves chose to be wolves. We chose other things. There are things in your blood you do not yet know about. If they wake, they will wake when you are afraid enough to need them. She had been 7 years old. She had not understood. She understood now. She took 1 step forward, with her hands still raised. The hunter swayed. His blade hung loose. Sit down. He sat down. He sat down on the floor of her cottage like a tired child, and he stared up at her with eyes that had begun to fill with a confusion so deep it was almost grief. The change in him began slowly, to unmake itself. The fur receding, the jaw drawing back, the teeth reseating themselves in a mouth that was, in the space of perhaps 4 breaths, only a man's mouth again. A young man, perhaps her own age. What did you do to me? He whispered. I do not know. It was the truth. Outside, a second scream. Not a man's, but the higher animal cry of one of the half-shifted hunters meeting something more than they were. Marith crossed to the window in 3 strides and pulled back the bar on the shutter. Tomas Erwin was on his knees in her garden. He was not dead. He was bleeding from his shoulder, badly, but he was upright, and he had his long knife still in his hand, and he was staring past the broken stems of her tansy at something at the end of her garden path. 2 wolves stood at the gate. The remaining 2 hunters were on the ground at the wolves' feet. The wolves were enormous. The first was iron gray, the same animal that had stood at the edge of the woods watching her cottage the previous afternoon. The second was black. Black as the inside of a deep well. Black as the cloak Velerin had worn the night he had crouched in the herb garden and asked her about her gray eyes. The black wolf was the size of a horse. It turned its head slowly and looked at her through the open shutter. Its eyes were amber. Marith's knees gave. She caught herself on the windowsill. The mark on her shoulder closed. She felt it close, felt the skin draw together, felt the heat in it pass from a burning into a steady, quiet warmth, like a hand laid flat against the place where his teeth had been. The babies inside her went still, not the still of fear, the still of listening. The black wolf walked up her garden path. It did not run. It did not lope. It walked the way a man walks who is afraid that if he moves too quickly, the thing in front of him will turn out to be a dream. It walked to the threshold of her open door, and it stopped. And it did not come in. It did not come in because it could not. The wards her grandmother had taught her without ever calling them wards, the small humming protections built into the warm stones of every healer's home, had risen around her like a held breath, and they were holding even him out. The wolf looked at her. She looked at him. For a long moment neither moved. Then he lowered his great black head and laid it on the threshold, with his amber eyes still fixed on hers, and he made a sound. A small sound. The sound of a creature very large and very tired and very afraid. And Meredith, who had spent 7 months teaching herself not to cry, put both hands over her face and wept. When she looked up again, the wolf was gone. A man was kneeling on the threshold in his place. He was thinner than she remembered. His black hair was longer, and there was gray in it now that had not been there when she left. His shoulders were sharp under his shirt. There were tears running down his face, openly, without shame. He did not speak. He was looking at the swell of her belly, and he was crying, and he was not crying for himself. "Valorin," she said. His face broke. He pressed his forehead against the threshold, against the line her grandmother's wards would not let him cross. He laid his palms flat on the wood on either side of his face. He bowed his head. "I will not enter, Meredith. I will not enter unless you tell me I may. I will kneel here until you decide. If you tell me to go, I will go, and I will never look for you again." He drew a breath. "But before you decide, I beg you, let me hear your voice, so that I know it was real." Meredith stood with her hands still warm and her shoulders still healing, and 2 small lives knocking quietly against the inside of her belly, and she looked at the broken man on her threshold, and she did not yet know what she would do. But she knew, with a clarity that felt almost like grief, that she had been wrong about one thing. The bond had not been a leash. She did not say his name again. Not yet. She crossed the cottage instead, slowly, and stopped 3 paces from the threshold. She did not step over the line of her grandmother's wards. She stood on her side of the door with her hands at her sides and her chin lifted. "Thomas is bleeding in my garden." Valorin did not lift his head. "He will live. Joran is with him. The hunter inside my house will not move from where you put him. I do not know what you did to him, Meredith. I felt it. From 3 days right away, I felt it." A pause. "You have always been more than they told you to be." The phrasing struck her. "Than they told you. Not than I knew. Then they told you. Speak. Tell me everything. From the night I left. Do not soften. I will know if you soften." He lifted his head. The line of his mouth was steady. The tears had not stopped, but he was no longer trying to hide them. "You heard me in the war chamber." "I did. With Sereth Voren, the Lord Sister of the High Council." "Yes. I knew you were there." The babies kicked. Both of them. Hard. Meredith took 1 step backward and put her hand on the doorframe to steady herself. "You, what?" "I knew you were there from the moment your foot touched the 3rd stair below the western corridor. The bond on my chest told me. I have always known where you are in my hold, Meredith. Since the night I marked you. I felt you climb. I felt you stop behind the column. I felt you listen." His voice did not break. "And I knew Sereth Voren had come to my chambers that night because she suspected you. She had been watching the kitchens. She had spoken to the cook. She had begun, 2 days earlier, to ask the kind of questions the High Council asks before they move against a girl with no name and a swelling belly. So I performed. I sat in my own war chamber and I performed for her. I said the worst things I could think of. I said the things I knew, if she repeated them to her brothers and her uncles, would convince them you were beneath their notice. I said you were a comfort. I said you were silent. I said the things that would make them write you off as a passing weakness of mine. I said them loud enough for you to hear, because I needed Sareth to believe I meant them, and Sareth would not have believed me unless I performed them for an audience she did not know was there. I was going to come down to you within the hour, as soon as she was gone. I was going to kneel on the floor of your chamber and beg you to forgive what I had said and tell you why I had said it. I had a horse waiting at the lower gate. I had everything ready. He drew a breath that shook him from the shoulders down. And then I felt the bond go cold. Meredith did not speak. I felt the third stair empty. I felt the servants' stair empty. I felt the kitchen gate empty. I felt you walk out of my hold into the snow, and I sat in my chair across from Sareth Barren and I could not move, because if I moved in that moment I would have killed her with my hands, and the hold would have torn itself apart by morning, and I would have lost you anyway. His voice did not break, but hers did. You are saying, she said, that I heard what I heard, and that I ran from what I ran from, because you wanted me to. No. Then, I did not want you to hear it, Meredith. The bond told me you were on the third stair. The bond did not tell me your grandmother was in your blood. None of us knew that you could hear through stone. No one in this hold has been able to hear through stone in 300 years. I thought my voice would carry as a murmur, as a shape, as a thing she could not understand. I thought I had 10 more minutes to finish performing for Sareth before I came to you and made it right. He closed his eyes. I was wrong. And you ran. And by the time I understood what you had heard, you were already 6 miles down the mountain road, and the snow had taken your tracks, and Sareth Barren had ridden out at first light with 2 of her brothers, and the only way to keep them from hunting you was to convince them that I, too, had cast you out. So I did. I forbade my men to look for you. I rode out in the night, alone, calling your name into the wind, because I knew the bond was still alive, that you were still alive, that somewhere on the long flat country south of the passes, you were carrying a weight I did not yet know the shape of. His eyes opened. He looked at her belly. I did not know there were 2. There are 2. I did not know there were any, Meredith. I had not yet told you. I was waiting for the right night. He pressed his forehead back to the threshold. I have been such a fool. For a long time neither of them spoke. Sareth Barren, she said finally. Yes. She is the one who poisoned you against me. She is the one who tried. She did not succeed in poisoning me. She succeeded only in poisoning what you heard. But there is more to it than that. The Barren line has been moving against me for 2 years. They want a Barren daughter in my bed. They want a Barren child on the high seat. They learned of you the same week Sareth did. They are the ones who sent the men in your garden this morning. They have been hunting you since the night you left, Meredith. The only thing that has kept you alive is that you walked, you did not ride, and they could not believe a girl with child could go that far on her own feet. Meredith laughed. It was the small, dry laugh of a woman who had spent 7 months being very tired. I am from a long-blooded line, Valerin. We walk. He laughed too. It cracked out of him. It was almost a sob. Yes. Sweet bones, you walk. She crossed the threshold. She did not decide to. Her feet decided for her. She stepped over her grandmother's wards, and the line of warm, humming protection parted around her like a curtain, and she crossed the 3 paces to where he knelt on the wood, and she sank to her knees in front of him, and she put both of her hands on either side of his face. He closed his eyes. He shook. I heard you laugh, and I thought you had never loved me. I have loved you every breath since the herb garden. I left you. I left you carrying them. You left to protect them. You left because you are their mother, and I had given you no reason to believe I would protect them myself. You ran because the bond told you to run, and the bond was right. I do not deserve to be forgiven. I do not ask to be forgiven. I only ask that you let me try, every day from this one forward, to be worth the second chance I am not entitled to." She kissed him. She had not planned to. She had told herself every night for 7 months that if she ever saw him again, she would not touch him. She had rehearsed the speech 100 times. She kissed him instead. He made a sound against her mouth that was not entirely human. The bond on her shoulder flared, not with pain this time, but with a clean, steady warmth that ran all the way down her arm and into her fingertips and across the swell of her belly. She felt for one impossible breath that she could feel his heartbeat under her own ribs. The babies inside her kicked, both of them, in the same rhythm. Thud, 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 greeting their father. He pulled back. He pressed his forehead to hers. He laid his trembling hand very carefully on the swell beneath her dress. "There are 2 of them," he whispered. 2. A horn sounded, far away, carried on the wind from the north. 3 long blasts, deep and slow, the kind of horn that was sounded only at the gate of a hold, and only when the gate of that hold had been taken. Thomas Erwin, in the garden, lifted his bleeding head. He had gone the color of old ash. "That horn has not been sounded in 200 years. Valerin's hand on Marith's belly went still. "Thomas, tell me what it means." Thomas looked at him, then at Marith, then last, at the swell beneath her dress. "It means the high seat of Hadith Vor has fallen." They rode within the hour. Joran stayed behind to carry Thomas south to the next village, where there was a healer who could close the deep cut in his shoulder. Thomas did not want to go. Marith knelt beside him in the pale grass of her garden and took his face between her hands and kissed his forehead the way a daughter kisses an old father, and she said, "Thomas Erwin, you have ridden far enough for one lifetime. Let us carry the rest." He wept. He let her go. She rode in front of Valorin on the great black horse he had ridden south. He had insisted, "My wolf needs you against my chest, Marith. Do not ask it of me to ride with you any further away than that." So she had let him lift her into the saddle, and he had wrapped one arm across her belly with a tenderness that made her throat close. Braille had come to the edge of the village to see them go. The old midwife had stood in the long road with her hands folded into her apron, and her eyes had been very clear and very steady on Marith's face. Marith had leaned down and kissed the old woman's gray hair, and Braille had said, "Only, come back and show me the baby's child. I delivered 87 and I am not finished." "I will," Marith had promised. They rode through the long, flat country at a pace the great black horse could sustain for days. Valorin spoke little. The bond between them hummed steadily in a key it had never reached before. Twice she felt his thoughts brush hers. Not in words, but in shapes. Shapes of his fear. Shapes of his love. Shapes of the small, impossible image of 2 children, which kept rising in his mind like a tide. They reached the high country on the 3rd day. Hadeth Vor was visible from the last bend in the trade road, sitting on its high black shoulder of mountain. Smoke was rising from it, 3 hard columns of black smoke from 3 different places in the lower hold. Valorin reined the horse in. He swore, very quietly. A rider was coming down the road toward them at a full gallop. A young woman, no older than 20, with red hair cropped short under a leather riding cap. Valorin's hand on the reins relaxed. "Mira," he said, "my second's daughter. She rides for me when nothing else can be trusted to ride." Mira reached them. Her horse was lathered. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat, and something that was almost certainly blood. "My lord, the hold is taken." "By whom?" "Sarith Vorin and her brothers. They came in 2 nights ago through the eastern postern. They had bought 3 of the gate watch. They had bought—" Her voice cracked. "They had bought your uncle, my lord." Marith felt Valorin go still behind her. "Halric." "Yes." "My father's brother. My blood." "Yes." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had gone very flat. Who lives? Most of the hold. The Vorens did not slaughter, they occupied. They took the high seat by midnight on the first day, and announced at dawn that you had abandoned the hold in your madness, and that the council had voted Halric Drask as regent. Mira spat into the dust. They have hostages, my lord. The healers, the old captains, the cook's daughter. 23 of them. They are kept in the high refectory under guard. The Vorens have made it known that the hostages will be released alive when you return and bend the knee, and not before. And if I do not return? Mira's eyes flicked to Marith. They have made it known, she said carefully, that the hostages will be executed one by one, beginning at sunset of the 7th day, and that the first will be the cook's daughter. Marith felt the baby's kick, once, hard. She knew the cook's daughter, a girl named Petra, 16 years old, with a slight stutter and a kind face. Petra had brought Marith hot bread on the nights she could not sleep. Petra had been kind to her. Petra was about to be killed for it. How many days? Valerin said. Tomorrow is the 7th. How many men do they have? Perhaps 200? The young wolves are still loyal to you. The old ones are watching to see which way the wind blows. And the wolves of the high slope, the feral ones. Mira hesitated. They have come down from the slope, my lord. Toward you. They have been gathering on the eastern ridge for 2 days. They began moving the hour you crossed back into the high country. They are not feral anymore. They are waiting. 300 of them, perhaps. They will not cross the ridge until you call them. A silence. They are mine again. Yes, my lord. Because the bond is whole. Yes, my lord. Mira, Marith said. My lady. The title came out of the girl's mouth without hesitation. Marith closed her eyes against the small hot sting of it. How many of the hostages can walk? All of them, my lady. None have been hurt. Yet. And the high refectory. It has only the one door. Yes, my lady, and one window, narrow, on the west side. Guarded? 2 men on the door at all times, one on the window. Marith opened her eyes. She was looking at the smoke rising from the lower hold. 3 columns of it. Her grandmother had told her once that there were 2 ways to bring a thing down. You can break the wall, my Marith, or you can rot the foundation. Walls take an army. Foundations take patience. Valerin. Yes, my heart. Do not bring your 300 wolves down off the ridge. His arm around her loosened. She felt him lean back to see her face. Marith. If you bring them down, the Vorens will kill the hostages before your wolves reach the gate. They will not wait for sunset. They will kill them as soon as they see fur on the ridge. She turned in the saddle. They have built their plan around the assumption that you will come for them with claws. Do not give them what they have planned for. What do you propose? I propose that I go in alone. He went perfectly still. No. Listen to me, Valerin Drask. She put her hand flat on his chest over the bond mark. I am the woman they have spent 7 months hunting. I am the prize they tried so hard to put a price on, and I am about to walk into their high refectory and offer to give myself to them in exchange for the hostages. They will take that offer. They will not be able to not take it. And while they are busy taking it, your wolves will come down off the ridge, and your young captains will rise inside the hold. And Mira will lead the loyal gatewatch through the eastern postern the same way the Vorens came in, and you and I... She paused. You and I will end this in the high seat. Together. Where it began. He was looking at her as if she were a stranger, as if he were only just now beginning to understand what he had crouched beside in the herb garden 3 winters ago. You are with child, twice over, and you propose to walk into a hall of men who want to kill you. They will not kill me before they have me in their hands. They have spent 7 months wanting to put me in their hands. Sareth Voren will want to look at me. She will want to speak to me. She will want, before anything else, to make me understand what she has won. That is the hour you will need. Marith, "And I," she said, "I am no longer the small gray thing they think they are catching." He looked at her for a long time. "My queen," he said finally. The word came out cracked. "Not yet. My queen." He kissed her, hard, on the forehead. Then he turned the horse, and Mira wheeled her own and rode east toward the ridge where 300 wolves were waiting, and the long, slow plan began to move. By the time the sun reached the height of noon, Marith would be walking alone up the long stone road to the gates of Hadeth Vor. She walked up the long stone road alone. She had refused the horse. She had refused the cloak. She had refused even the small hidden knife Mira had tried to press into her hand. "They will search me," she had said. "I go in with empty hands." She had kept only her grandmother's iron-handled knife, and she had given that, at the last moment, to Valerin. She had pressed it into his palm and folded his fingers around it and said, "Give it back to me when this is done." He had only kissed the inside of her wrist once, and then turned the great black horse and ridden east. She walked. The gates of Hadeth Vor stood open. There were Vorin men on the wall, watching her come, but no one shouted, and no one raised a bow. A girl in a plain wool dress, walking up the road alone with both hands open at her sides, and the swell of 2 children before her, was not the kind of thing the Vorin guard had been told to fire at. She had been told to be brought, alive, to the high refectory. She passed under the gate. The lower hold was quieter than she had ever known it. No children played in the courtyard. Doors were closed, shutters were drawn. A single gray cat watched her cross the cobbles from the top of a woodpile and then turned its face away. 2 Vorin guards met her at the inner stair. They did not speak. They did not search her. They took her by each arm, not roughly, and led her up. The high refectory was at the heart of the hold. Long oak tables, a high vaulted ceiling, a great hearth at the western end. It was, now, a holding pen. The hostages were against the western wall. 23 of them, sitting on the stone floor, hands bound. Petra, white-faced, eyes red. The cook, the kennel master. Faces Marith knew. Faces that, when they saw her, opened in confusion and then in something terribly like hope. Sarith Vorin was standing on the dais at the eastern end of the hall. She was a tall woman. Pale hair coiled at the back of her head, a long pale face, eyes the color of river ice, the silver collar of a lord sister at her throat. She was smiling. 2 of her brothers stood behind her, and in the high seat that had belonged to Valerian's father, and back through 9 generations of Drask Alphas, sat a heavy older man with Valerin's jaw and Valerin's brow and none of Valerin's eyes, Halric Drask, the uncle. Marith of the long blood. Sarith's voice was warm. "Look at you. You walked all the way back. On your own 2 feet, with 2 of his children in you. I confess I am impressed." Marith said nothing. "Where is he?" "Not here." Sarith tilted her head. "And do you know, my dear, why I have not yet given the order to begin cutting hostages?" "Tell me." "Because you walked up the road alone, which means he is either dead in a ditch, which I would feel through the wolves, and I do not feel, or he has come to some arrangement with you. So I am curious. What are you here to offer me, little long-blooded thing?" Marith stepped forward. She walked past the long oak tables. She walked past the bound hostages. She walked, with both hands open at her sides, until she was at the foot of the dais, 10 paces from Sarith Vorin. "I am here to offer you me." A pause. Halric Drask leaned forward. "Explain," Sarith said. "You wanted me dead because I carried his heir. You sent men to kill me in the south. They failed. I am here now, in your hands. Take me. Take the children. Do what you wish. In exchange, you release the hostages. All 23. Out the gate. Walking. And the Alpha?" will not come for you while you have me. He has been told. He will withdraw to the eastern holds. The high seat is yours. The hostages walk. You have everything you came for. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to test it. Release the hostages. They walk. You keep me. If the Alpha comes for me, I am the one in your hand, and you are the one with the knife. She held out her wrists. You have nothing to lose by trying it. Sareth looked at her for a long moment. Marith could feel in the warmth that was rising in her hands, held still, held down against her thighs, hidden in the folds of her wool dress, the bond on her shoulder humming. Valoran was close. The wolves were coming down off the ridge in silence, and Mira had moved the eastern postern, and the young captains inside the hold had risen, and the hour she had asked him for was almost spent. She needed Sareth to talk. "Why, my children?" she said into the long, stretching pause. "Why not just me? Why come for the children at all?" Sareth's eyes brightened. It was the question Sareth had been waiting to be asked. "Oh, my dear. Has he not told you?" "Told me what?" "Why your line was hunted to almost nothing 300 years ago." The babies inside her went still. "Tell me." "Long-blooded children carried by an alpha of Drask blood," Sareth said, her voice almost gentle now, "are not heirs, my dear. They are unmakers. The bond between long blood and alpha blood does not produce wolves. It does not produce witches. It produces a thing the holds have not been willing to allow to live for 9 generations. I confess, almost sorry. You seem like a very brave girl, but you understand, I hope, that it is not personal." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that what you are carrying, my dear, is older than this council. And the High Council of every mountain hold from here to the Eastern Sea has had a standing order, since the last one was born, to make sure another one is not." Marith stood very still. Inside her, the babies were no longer kicking. They were humming. She did not have another word for it. It was a low, steady vibration, like a struck bell, beginning at the base of her belly and rising up through her ribs and into the bond on her shoulder and out through the warmth in her open hands, and Sareth Voran saw it on her face one breath too late. "Take her!" Sareth snapped. The 2 guards behind Marith moved. They did not reach her. The doors of the high refectory blew off their hinges. Valoran was through the doorway before the doors had finished hitting the floor. He was in his half-shifted form, taller than a man and broader than a wolf, black fur at his shoulders and forearms and throat, eyes burning amber, claws where his fingers had been, and behind him came the wolves. Not 300. Not from the east, from every direction. From the eastern postern, from the kitchens, from the lower stair, from the high gallery. Drask wolves and the long feral wolves of the high slope, who were no longer feral at all, pouring into the high refectory in a flood of fur and teeth, falling on the Voran guards with the focused, purposeful violence of creatures who had been waiting for 7 months. Sareth Voran snatched a long knife from the table beside her dais. She lunged for Marith. She did not reach her either. Marith raised her hands. The warmth in them did not flare. It bloomed. The air between her palms and Sareth Voran's chest thickened the way it had thickened in front of the half-shifted hunter, but this time it did not stop at thickening. It struck, in a wave that did not have a color and did not have a sound, and had only a feeling, the feeling of an old line saying no further, sister. Sareth was lifted off her feet. She was thrown back against the high seat. Halric Drask was thrown back with her, and the great oak chair Valorian's grandfather had carved with his own hands cracked down the middle and split. Sareth lay in the wreckage. She did not get up. Halric Drask did not get up either. The fighting was brief. The Voran brothers fell in the doorway. The bot guards threw down their weapons. The young captains cut the cords on the hostages' wrists, and Petra ran sobbing into Marith's arms, and Marith held her and stroked her hair, and did not weep, because she was no longer the kind of woman who could afford to weep in front of girls who had been about to be cut. Valoran, in his terrible half-shifted form, crossed the hall. He did not shift down. He came to her as he was, taller than a man and broader than a wolf, and he knelt on the stone in front of her with Petra still in her arms, and he laid his great clawed hand very carefully on the swell of her belly. The babies hummed under his palm. He lowered his head against her hip, and the half-shift flowed out of him, and he was a man again, kneeling with his forehead against the curve of her body, and he was crying. And Merith laid her hand on the back of her alpha's bowed head and finally allowed herself to weep. The high seat of Hadeth Vor was reclaimed by the time the sun touched the bell tower. The last Vorin rider fled by sundown, and on the long oak floor of the high refectory, with 23 freed hostages and 100 Drask wolves, and the smell of new pine smoke rising from the courtyards below, Valoran Drask drew Merith down to her knees in front of him, and he bared his throat to her, and he said, "Finish it." She set her teeth to the place where his neck met his shoulder. She bit down. The bond completed itself in a flood that did not feel like pain. It felt like a door, somewhere very deep and very old, opening for the first time in 300 years. The babies inside her hummed. The wolves of the high slope lifted their heads, and every wolf in Hadeth Vor answered in a single long sustained sound, the howl of a pack, whose alpha had at last come home. Spring came late to Hadeth Vor that year. The snow lingered on the high passes a month longer than it should have. The eastern slope was slow to green. The land, the old healers said, was tired, was healing, but tired, in the way a body is tired after a long fever has finally broken. Merith was tired too. She had grown enormous through the late winter. The babies, a boy and a girl, Braille's old hands had been right, had grown so large in her last weeks that she had not been able to lace her own boots. Valorin had not let her carry anything else. He had followed her with the hovering, attentive worry of a man who had spent 7 months believing he had lost her and had not yet, even in the 3rd month of having her back, fully recovered from it. She had laughed at him, often. Braille, who had been brought up from Brenmore at the end of winter, had laughed at him more. The babies had been born on the first warm night of true spring. Braille had delivered them both, the boy first, dark-haired and red-faced and furious, and the girl second, smaller, quieter, with hair the pale color of winter wheat, and eyes that opened, when they opened, the same clear gray as Merith's. Valorin had not left the chamber. He had sat at the head of the bed with both of his hands wrapped around Merith's, and he had wept openly when each child cried, and Braille had told him briskly to make himself useful and bring hot water. And he had, the Alpha of Hadeth Vor, had risen and gone into the kitchens himself and brought hot water. The hold had loved him for it. Suffering done well, Braille had said once, made a man more valuable than he had been before he suffered. Done badly, it makes him a danger. Your Alpha did his suffering well. The boy was named Thomas, for the old master of horse who had ridden 11 days alone to find her. The girl was named Weneth, for Merith's grandmother, whose voice had reached her across 30 years to teach her how to stand in front of a hunter with empty hands. They were 3 weeks old now. Merith sat in the herb garden where Valorin had first crouched beside her and asked about her gray eyes. She had Weneth in the crook of one arm and Tomas against her shoulder, and the late spring sun was warm on her face, and Valorin was kneeling in the freshly turned earth in front of her, planting winter sage with his own hands. "You are doing it wrong. I am doing it the way you told me. I told you to plant them 6 inches apart. These are 6 inches apart. These are 4 inches apart, Valorin Drask, and they will choke each other by midsummer, and then we will have no winter sage, and then Braille will scold you." He sat back on his heels, dirt on his hands and a small smile on his face, and he looked at her across the bed of dark earth with an expression so undefended that she nearly forgot, for a moment, what she had been scolding him about. "Better? he asked after he had moved one of the seedlings. Better. You are a very harsh teacher, Marith Drask. My grandmother was harsher. I would have liked to meet your grandmother. She would have bitten you, Valerin. Yes, probably. He went back to his planting. Beyond the low garden wall, the lower hold was full of the bright noise of a season returning. The hold had been rebuilt in the long months since the Vorens fell, and it had not been rebuilt as it had been before. The high refectory had been left, by Marith's own quiet request, with the doors removed and never replaced. Let them remember, she had told the carpenters, that the doors of the hold can be made to open. Sereth Voren had survived. Marith had insisted, in a voice that brooked no argument. Sereth had been stripped of the silver collar and the foreign name, and exiled to one of the southern holds where the long flat country began, where she would live out the rest of her life as a common healer's assistant under the name Sarah, and where she would never again be permitted to ride north of the trade road. Halric Drask had not survived. He had died in his cell on the third night. The Voren line had been folded into the Drask line by the formal old ritual of kin-taking, an ancient rite no one had performed in 200 years, by which a defeated house was absorbed rather than destroyed, and its surviving young given new names and new oaths. The wolves of the high slope had come down off the ridge and rejoined the hold, and the sickness in the land had begun to lift, slowly, week by week. The babies were the proof of it. Braille had told Marith, on the second day after they were born, what Sereth had told her in the high refectory. About the long-blooded children of an alpha of Drask blood, about what they were called by the old council. Unmakers, Marith had said. That is the council's word, child. It is not the right one. What is the right one? Braille had looked at the two small sleeping faces in their basket beside the bed. The right word is menders, child. They were called unmakers by the men who feared what they would unmake. But what they unmake is not the world. What they unmake is the sickness in the world. They are the reason this hold's bond is humming again. They are the reason the high slope's wolves came home. They are the reason the eastern slope, in another year, will be green again. Marith had looked at her sleeping son and her sleeping daughter, and she had not been able to speak for a long time. They are very small, she had said finally. Yes, Braille had said. And so are you, child. So is your grandmother. Small things mend the world, Marith. Always. The big things can only break it. She thought of that now, in the herb garden, with the sun on her face and her son's small breath against her collarbone. Valoran looked up. What are you smiling at? Nothing. You are smiling at me. I am smiling at the dirt on your hands. My hands are an honor to the dirt. Valoran. He laughed. He rose, brushing his palms on his trousers, and he came to the low stone bench, and he sat down beside her. He put his arm around her shoulders and laid his cheek against the top of her head, and they sat in the warm sun without speaking for a long while. Thomas made a small, indignant noise. Valoran reached, without looking, and placed his great calloused fingertip against the small, fierce hand. The baby gripped the finger with the immediate, furious certainty of a creature who had decided 3 weeks ago that the world belonged to him. He is going to be terrible, Valoran said. He is going to be yours. Same thing. Yes. He kissed her hair. Marith. Yes. I have not yet thanked you for coming back. She turned her face slightly against his shoulder. I did not come back for you, Valoran Drask. I know. I came back for them. I know. You were a happy accident. Marith? She laughed. She felt him laugh against her. Gwyneth blinked up at them both with her clear gray eyes, and Thomas tightened his fierce little grip on his father's finger. And the late spring sun moved, slowly, across the herb garden where, 3 winters ago, an alpha had crouched beside a no-name healer's apprentice and asked her the question that had begun everything. In the long, flat country to the south, In a village called Brenmore, an old midwife named Braille was setting out bread on her own table, and she was smiling, because in her pocket was a folded letter that had come up the trade road that morning, written in a hand she knew, and the letter read, "Only, they are here. They are well. Come back in summer and I will show them to you, as I promised. M." And on the eastern ridge above the hold, where 300 wolves had once waited for an alpha to call them home, the wind moved through the late spring grass, and the grass was green for the first time in a year, and somewhere far below in a herb garden, 2 small new lives were beginning, quietly, to mend a world that had forgotten, for 9 generations, that it could be mended at all. The bond hummed. It would hum for a very long time. Thank you for listening. I hope this story stayed with you. May the small things in your own life, the quiet things, the patient things, the things that walk into rooms with empty hands, mend whatever needs mending. Sleep well.